And joining us now, he is the CEO of the National Agricultural Aviation Association. Andrew Moore is with us. Andrew, thanks for taking the time to join us today. How are you?
I'm just living the dream. Thank you for having me, Jesse.
Well,
Appreciate
I
it.
appreciate you joining us as well. Thanks for making time here to be with us today. And, just thinking about the ag aviation industry, I mean, over 100 years old now. This is just a century old practice that, we see a lot. You think about, getting out and spraying our fields and our crops during the summer. We see those planes flying around, but, thinking back 100 years old now plus, a lot of technological innovation has happened, I'm sure, in the ag aviation industry as we've gone over the years, Andrew.
Absolutely. We started with biplanes that were used in World War One that held maybe 150 gallons that were piston engines. You had human flaggers that were lining up the next swath. Now you have 800-gallon aircraft on turbine engines that are flying 30% to 40% faster, much greater capacity, GPS systems, GIS systems, onboard meteorological measurement systems to make sure that application is targeted, much more efficient, going to where it's supposed to go and nowhere else. And just our size has increased markedly in terms of acres treated.
Sure, sure. I can't imagine just all the technology that has come into agriculture broadly here in the last even 5 to 10 years. And then you mentioned some of the things there on the aviation side. And, I think about this as well. And I'm sure farmers, they know this firsthand when you have really wet conditions. We saw some of
Mhm.
that here earlier this year, or you have some of those fields that maybe it's a little hard to get into at times. The terrain might be a little bit rough, or
Exactly.
maybe you're spraying something else. So, that's when aerial application really comes in hand.
That's right. And don't forget the speed. So,
Mhm.
you're able to treat 4 to 5 times the amount of land than any other form of application. And when you're looking at pest pressure, whether it's insect, whether it's a fungus, whether it's a weed, um, you know, the faster you get to it, the better the yield harvest will be for that farmer. And the other thing, and when you're dealing with weed resistance now with a lot of the herbicides, um, you have to get to that weed when it's at a certain size. Once it grows to a certain um, length or maturity, it's much more difficult to eradicate. It might be seeding and spreading. So aerial application can get to that crop disease, whatever it is, much faster than and at that pest's more vulnerable point to eradicate it.
Well, Andrew, you mentioned as well more targeted when it comes to spraying and aerial application. We hear some of the stories about different pesticide drift, that camber drift, etc. Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about just some of the things that the ag aviation industry is doing to continue to improve how focused and targeted some of that spraying is to maybe minimize some drift?
Absolutely. Well, a lot of it there's just many different technologies and techniques. First of all, 100% of our industry is GPS now, so you're able to get within inches of accuracy, uh, eliminate overspray using the GPS system. The other thing that we're seeing as well is people using either smokers and I'll explain that a little bit more, and also what's known as an onboard meteorological measurement system. So you can tie this meteorological measurement system that falls right under the wing of the aircraft, and it's reading wind speed, direction, uh, barometric pressure, humidity 3 times a second. And it can feed that information directly into the GPS system, and then it can line up the the aircraft based on wind direction. So it can steer you further away, say, from an edge of a field. If the wind is blowing towards another field, it can lead you, that onboard measurement system can lead you further into the field, so that the applied material will just dress the edges and not move over outside of that field. The other thing we're seeing as well is just setup. We've learned a tremendous amount from setup. Back in the 30 years ago or longer, you might have the boom system of the aircraft go all the way across to the one end of the wing to the other. And the boom system would be really tucked in very close to the underside of the wing. What happens then is two things. One, just the aerodynamics of flying, there's kind of a wing edge vortices that kicks up. So it can take the applied material and kind of create a vortices, or like a little tornado, and it kicks up the material instead of pushing it down into the crop canopy. Now you're seeing much more narrow booms, maybe 60%, 70% of the wingspan. It's out of that wingspan vortices, and it's just pushing directly down into the crop. And you're also seeing the booms are dropped down now, maybe a meter or two outside of, into more of a clean airflow that pushes it down away from the prop wash and so forth. So it's pushing it down just from the air pressure from the wing and outside of any other air disturbances that maybe the engine's creating.
Well, Andrew, we talk about all the technological advancements, and I'm curious to ask about this. Are we seeing more, maybe, or any unmanned aircraft or drone technology come into spraying here across the country nowadays?
It exists. Now we do industry surveys every year at the end of the season. We just did one. And we did find that we do have a few members that are using drones for application. It's still very small. They are small for the most part. They're slow and small, but I think they have a niche. They can go to areas we wouldn't go to because they're too maybe cramped with obstacles, and an aircraft couldn't get in there. But they're right now, in terms of treating the scope that we treat, 127 million acres, out of 347 million acres, so almost a third of the cropland, and that doesn't include all the pasture land and range land and forestry. The fleet is just way too small and slow to come close to being able to treat that. I would say it's probably 0.25% of the industry. And that could change. The technologies will change and regulations to allow them to probably treat more with larger aircraft. But then they still would have to go through the same process we go through, and the aircraft would have to be certified and maintained properly, and so forth. But it's we're seeing some cars. Elon Musk will tell you that the Tesla is automated, right? And
Sure,
it can drive without any driver assistance. So there's lots of technology. That's where we're kind of headed for automation. I mean, tractors and so forth. So.
Andrew, you mentioned regulations and things of that nature. Is there anything, any issues that the association is watching closely right now, or working on, maybe with EPA or other things? Is there anything else, or with the FAA, anything you guys are watching closely right now?
Yes, that's why we exist as the National Agricultural Aviation Association. We do policy advocacy, of course. And here in the Washington area, one of our big issues has always been registering pesticides for aerial use. So, the pesticide process is basically a 15-year process. So every pesticide on the market has to be re-registered every 15 years, and every 15 years it has to go through scrutiny, whether it's dietary safety or it's environmental safety, it's safety to water, it's safety to endangered species. So we work with the the EPA and the pesticide manufacturers to provide them data on what we're doing in terms of taking into account drift reduction technologies, everything I've kind of some of the things I've explained to you, and to really not be careful about getting overly conservative with models. With sometimes the assumptions that are made using some of these models are really overestimate risk. So we have to provide EPA data that shows them, like our survey data, like how many acres a typical aircraft would treat per day. They might estimate far more acres, which, because you're treating more acres, you're in maybe a occupational worker is exposed to more pesticide, so their models might be overly estimating risk. We're able to actually show them real data and say, no, that we don't have that capacity, or that's not typical in our industry. It's much fewer acres that are being mixed loaded for that product, and so forth. So we work with the agencies to make sure products are registered and let them know about our technological advances, and also let them know that without aerial application and the judicious use of pesticides, we have to remember that there would be far more land that would be used for farming. And that could take away endangered and threatened species habitat. It could take away carbon sequestering forests. It could take away water filtering wetlands. And we also are a part of, consider ourselves climate smart agriculture. We're seeding cover crops. That's a huge issue now at the end of the season, where we're putting out cover crops over the cash crop. And what that does, whether it's some sort of ryegrass or a radish, buckwheat, clover, what it does is it continues to keep the soil aerated. It conserves water in the soil. It fertilizes the soil. And what do plants do? They suck carbon from the air. So it is a carbon sequestering device. So we consider ourselves really part of the solution, and we need to make sure that the regulatory agencies take that into account.
Well, Andrew, fantastic insight. Before we run out of time, before I let you go, any other final thoughts? Anything else you'd like to share here today, just about what the National Agricultural Aviation Association is working on right now?
Well, one other issue that I was going to mention quickly is, we see more and more obstacles, whether they are like ground affixed obstacles, whether they're wind turbines, whether they're the meteorological evaluation towers that are measuring whether an area is able to have wind turbines, communication towers now, because rural broadband, is a big issue, and you have the new infrastructure bill. So, we're working with the FAA to actually promulgate a rule that was passed in 2018 by Congress to mark towers between 50 and 200 feet, because we do sadly have accidents in our industry, sometimes fatal, colliding with both towers and wires. We like wires to be underground, and we like these towers to be marked and lit if possible, and have a database so we know where they are, because we need to keep doing what we're doing for farmers like we have 101 years, and we need healthy pilots and safe pilots to do that. But because it's an important industry, like I said, pasture land, range land, 127 million acres of cropland out of 347 million acres. Plus, we do firefighting and mosquito and disease carrying pest eradication for the public health. So,
a lot of things that you guys do, a lot of things you're working on. Folks can learn more online, agaviation.org. With that, Andrew Moore, CEO of the National Agricultural Aviation Association. Thanks for the time today. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.